Good morning, everyone. I'm Thena Berry. Welcome to today's service on this, I don't know if it's chilly, warm, or what, spring morning. It started off this morning at about 45, and by the time Imani and I got here, it was about 60. So I don't know what it's going to do today. Of course, we are experiencing a whole year's worth of different weather in this wonderful month of April. And I'm very happy to say that when it hits 74 today, I'll be in the lake on my kayak. Welcome to kayak season. Today, we evoke our fourth principle, which calls us to an individual search for truth and meaning. We are graced with the presence of Rachel Rogers, who will be reminding us to begin again. We all know our faith journeys are lifelong. Each of us builds our own personal spiritual practice over time. And as we develop these, they're meant to serve as stepping stones and building blocks along our lives' paths. In this service, we'll explore the miracle of those daily, even sometimes hourly opportunities to renew our faith that are experienced as we dedicate ourselves to spiritual practice. We will celebrate the direct experiences with the divine that may start as small moments, but swell into larger moments of awakening and personal groundswells of faith. Welcome, Rachel. We are very much looking forward to hearing your words today, and let us all gather together. Today's chalice lighting words and the chalice lighting will be handled by our friend Sandy Blands.
Good morning and welcome. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. That's by Rumi.
Everybody, this is kind of exciting to me today. This is my first time back in church in the building, and I get to see people I've seen many, many years and brand new people that I have never met before. Very much looking forward to getting to know everybody all over again. Our covenant is the silk that joins our congregation together in a web of interconnection. Please join me in reading with me if you are so moved. We covenant together to make a welcoming community, to walk together in the way of truth and love, to seek the life of the Spirit as it is known by each person, to support each other in thought, word, and deed as we work to build a better world. Whether you are in the sanctuary today or online, I invite you to rise in spirit or body as we sing Return Again, which is hymn number 1011 in Singing the Journey. It's around, so please join in as you feel moved.
Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return to where you are, return to where you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to where you are, return to where you are,
Even masked, it's still fun to sing with everybody. Thank you, everybody who participated in that. This morning is Time for All Sages is a classic German children's story of return. And don't worry, we get to hear it in English.
The story of the Root Children. Under the ground, deep in the earth, among the roots of the trees, the little Root Children were fast asleep all winter long. They felt nothing of the biting wind, the cold snow, or the stinging hailstorms. They slept peacefully in their warm burrows. They were dreaming of the sunshine in which they had played all through the summer. And what wonderful dreams they were! When at last the winter came to an end and the sun began to melt the snow, Mother Earth came along with her candle to wake them up again. "Wake up, children," she called kindly. "Time to get up now. You've slept long enough. Spring is coming, and there is work to be done. I've brought you scissors, needles and thread, and pieces of cloth so that you can all make new clothes. Wake up! As soon as you're ready, I'll unlock and open the doors up to the ground." The children yawned and stretched. Then they jumped up merrily. "Hooray! Spring is coming!" Mother Earth had pieces of lovely colored cloth in her basket. Each of the Root Children chose her own color to make a dress. The Snowdrop chose a snow-white cloth, the Forget-Me-Not a sky blue piece, the Buttercup a bright yellow, the Daisy white with yellow and a bit of red, and the Poppy bright red. Then they sat down in a cozy circle and began to work busily. They cut, they sewed and pressed until everything fitted exactly. And as they worked, they sang all the spring songs that they knew. As soon as they had finished making their new dresses, they went up to Mother Earth in a long procession. Mother Earth looked over her spectacles in surprise when she saw the Root Children coming so soon. "Well, well, you have been quick," she exclaimed. "And how nice it all looks." Even the little ants, who had been helping Mother Earth to wind up her wool, came to look inquisitively. They had never seen such splendid clothes. But there was still more to be done. The ladybirds, the beetles, the grubs and the bumblebees had also been sleeping under the ground and had now woken up. They had to be washed and brushed, painted colorfully and made to shine so that they would look as beautiful as possible. What a hustle and bustle was going on down there. Up above ground, the warm sun was already bringing out the new green leaves on the trees. Would the Root Children be ready in time? At last, it was really springtime. Mother Earth opened the door. Then out into the lovely warm spring sunshine came the stately procession of beetles, ladybirds and Root Children with their blades of grass and flowers. In the woods the butterflies fluttered happily around the flowers. The lilies of the valley found a cool spot in the shade of the trees beside the blue violet, and there they let their flower bells tinkle. There too, old Father Sliff Sluff Slibber Sluck came slowly creeping along. "Ah, there you all are. Welcome to the big forest," he called to the children. The little Violet looked at him shyly from her safe place behind her tree. She had never seen such a creature before. Summer came. In the little brook that flowed between the meadows, the water lily let herself be carried over the water like a princess. The reeds whispered in the wind. The forget-me-nots came and stepped carefully into the water. But the beetles grumbled. "It's getting too crowded here. Go and play somewhere else." In the flower meadows, the Root Children were having a high time. They danced nimbly in the warm sunshine. Hop and skip, whoopee, what fun! If only it were always summer. The butterflies fluttered above them, and even the beetle risked the dance. The crickets chirped, the bees buzzed, and that was their music. Mind out, little grass, don't fall down. But summer also came to an end. The sharp autumn wind whirled the brightly colored leaves through the air and tugged at the root children's clothes. "Ooh, cold wind, hurry home. It's getting cold here. It's time to go to bed." So then they all went back again in a long procession. Mother Earth was standing by the door and hugged each child one by one. "Come in, children," she said, "and you too, beetles and bees. It's warm and cozy in here, and I've got something for you all to eat and drink. After that, you must all go to sleep until I wake you up again in the springtime."
Our youth are invited to go follow their RE teachers to their class. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember us who love you well. We know all the gifts you bring into the world each day. So thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day.
Our Share the Plate partner this month is Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth. UUME envisions a world in which reverence, gratitude, and care for each other and for the living earth are central to the lives of all people. Its mission is to be a wellspring of spiritual and educational grounding and practical support for bold, accountable action for environmental justice, climate justice, and the flourishing of all life. The directions for the various ways to donate are listed on the screen and in your Zoom chat window. As always, we are grateful for your generosity. And gratitude for GNUUC's beautiful natural setting and for the earth as our home. Please give generously to the Share the Plate in April. Our speaker this morning is Rachel Rogers, a seminarian at Meadville Lombard Theological School and an aspirant to ministerial fellowship with the UA. Rachel discovered Unitarian Universalism in 2014 and quickly discerned her call to ministry and her particular passion for leading worship. She lives here in Nashville, Tennessee, with her wife and 2 young daughters, and is a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. Rachel has chosen a reading to share with us this morning, and following that reading, our music director, Fran Gabor, will offer a musical meditation written by Ellen Hanson Ellis.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me. Our reading this morning, The Sacred Pause, is from a book called Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. In our lives, we find ourselves in situations we can't control, circumstances in which none of our strategies work. Helpless and distraught, we frantically try to manage what is happening. Our child takes a downward turn in academics, and we issue one threat after another to get them in line. Someone says something hurtful to us, and we strike back quickly or retreat. We make a mistake at work, and we scramble to cover it up or go out of our way to make up for it. We head into emotionally charged confrontations, nervously rehearsing and strategizing. The more we fear failure, the more frenetically our bodies and minds work. We fill our days with continual movement, mental planning and worrying, habitual talking, fixing, scratching, adjusting, phoning, snacking, discarding, buying, looking in the mirror. Learning to pause is the first step in the practice of radical acceptance. A pause is a suspension of activity, a time of temporary disengagement when we are no longer moving toward any goal. The pause can occur in the midst of almost any activity and can last for an instant, for hours, or for seasons of our life. We may take a pause from our ongoing responsibilities by sitting down to meditate. We may pause in the midst of meditation to let go of thoughts and reawaken our attention to the breath. We may pause by stepping out of daily life to go on a retreat or to spend time in nature. We may pause in a conversation, letting go of what we're about to say in order to genuinely listen and be with the other person. We may pause when we feel suddenly moved or delighted or saddened, allowing the feelings to play through our heart. In a pause, we simply discontinue whatever we are doing and become wholeheartedly present, attentive, and often physically still. Taking our hands off the controls and pausing is an opportunity to see the wants and fears that are driving us. During the moments of a pause, we become conscious of how the feeling that something is missing or wrong keeps us leaning into the future, on our way somewhere else. This gives us a fundamental choice in how we respond. We can continue our futile attempts at managing our experience, or we can meet our vulnerability with the wisdom of acceptance. So ends our reading. And really settling in my heart, again, around that, our fourth principle, the independent search for truth and meaning. I'll be talking to you a bit about my own personal search for truth and meaning, and also the spiritual practices that have helped reconnect me in times where I've felt kind of on my own. To start off, it goes without saying that these past few years have been hard on a totally different level for most, if not all of us. In fact, about half of the conversations I had in this room this morning were about that very thing. Paradigms have been shifted. Systems of support have shown their weaknesses or sprung up anew from unexpected sources. Everyone learned new ways of being together, new ways to work, new ways to learn, new ways to worship. I also know that all of us by this point have done plenty of listening to one another and have learned that almost to a household or even to a person, the particular set of challenges that each of us have faced have been pretty different and deeply personal. For me, when the onset of the pandemic hit, my wife, Ashley, was about 3 months pregnant with our second child. Our daughter was just about to turn 2 and start preschool. I went from being in an office every day to suddenly working from home. My daughter did not go to preschool. It's a very typical story. I mean, everything was a challenge. Every adaptation felt like a loss. We locked down entirely due to Ashley's pregnancy, which meant we didn't see our family, we didn't see any friends, and of course, we suddenly weren't going to church. Just as it did in all of our congregations, for us, Sunday services became live streams. And in the first few months of the pandemic, we faithfully logged on every Sunday. It was a touch point for us, a sense of normalcy, a sense of home. And then we tried really, really hard to pay attention, while our 2-year-old became increasingly annoyed with us at not paying attention to her. And after the time for all ages, which at that point in our congregation had a lot of really excellent puppet shows that totally kept Ellis engaged. After that was over, one of us had to leave the room to go attend to the baby, while the other one stayed back feeling kind of guilty that we weren't helping out in the house. So eventually, I'm sorry to say, our Sunday Zoom attendance fell way off, like really hard off. Because on top of all of those things happening while we were trying to attend church on Sunday, we also had that whole Zoom fatigue thing going on. Zoom at work, Zoom birthday parties, Zoom anything you can imagine. Zoom story time at the library was even something we tried to pull off for a while. So by the time our baby, Greta, was born in September, we were all but completely off the rails. Our whole world was about keeping our kids happy and trying to keep them safe, keep them healthy, which was nice in parts, but we were also so exhausted by the rigor of everything that I started to realize that I was seeing my own spiritual practices fall by the wayside. I had time to work, eat, sleep, and take care of babies. And that was it. Like, that was everything. We were in survival mode as a family, and we stayed there for a long time. And it was months later, well into 2021, when I actually started to worry that I had been neglecting my faith in some really real ways. I didn't have that anchor of church on Sundays, and I didn't have those spiritual practices that I'd somehow forgotten to keep up with. And here I was, planning to enter into seminary after years of preparation, and felt like I was doing so at a time when I was more isolated from spiritual community than I'd been in a really long time. Probably since before I discovered Unitarian Universalism about 6 or 7 years before. So circumstances for me felt dire in that moment. I was in conflict with myself. My call to ministry still felt strong, but it almost felt like it was calling to me while I was residing at the bottom of a dark well. And I wasn't sure how I was going to climb out to answer it. So this wasn't my first time feeling cut off from faith. Like so many members of our movement, I come from my own background of religious hurt and trauma and have a faith of origin that I left behind a really long time ago. I spent my childhood and my youth in struggle around the fact that I couldn't hold on to the blind faith that was asked of me. And it was every day, like they would tell me I should just believe it, but I couldn't quite pull it off. In my early 30s, this period was darkest for me. I was outside of any faith tradition, and I was adamantly secular. Any mention of God or religion or prayer or faith would send me into an angry tailspin. I firmly rejected any philosophy or teaching that I couldn't believe with my whole heart. I wanted that blind faith. So I was skeptical of everything. My reaction to any mention of spirituality pretty much just sent me into a tantrum. Like no one was going to try to make meaning out of my misery. Like I wasn't going to have it. Arms crossed, stomping my feet. It reminds me of my children actually at this point when I try to get them to do most of anything, but I digress. It was around this time I was a member of a weekly support group. This support group was focused around stress reduction and trauma healing. And the group was led by 2 wise and loving therapists who were interested in working with us around using mindfulness-based stress reduction. Now, at the beginning of each group session, we were asked to check in on 3 topics. How are we feeling emotionally, physically, and spiritually? And I remember during the first several weeks of these sessions, I would call a hard pass on that 3rd question. Like, I'd be like, emotionally, I'm feeling sad, maybe a little bit, I'm fine, a little bit sad. Like, physically, my shoulder hurts and I'm tired. Spiritually, pass. Like, I would not comment at all. And I realized after a while that I might have been a bit of a bad influence on the group, because other people there with me started to be like, oh yeah, me too. If she doesn't have to do that part, I'm not going to do that part. There was a lot of people passing on the spirituality question. And that led our group leaders to ask us to try something different, which was to think of our spiritual check-in is whether we felt connected or not connected on that day. That idea, that suggestion, where I could say, emotionally, I'm sad, physically, I'm tired, spiritually, I don't feel connected. It planted a seed for me that would germinate big time. But we'll get back to that connection part later. So as I mentioned, this support group was bringing a mindfulness practice to a group of trauma survivors. So the intention was helping us find stress relief and connection to present, to the here and now. And so what that meant for us initially was that a group of people who were used to spending time with little to no connection to their bodies, which they were doing for their own protection or self-care, suddenly had a really hard time when asking to try it out, like a little bit of panic for me included. And it was really, really hard. It felt too hard. And so it left me curious. So curious that when I got home that night thinking there's got to be a way for me to do this. There's got to be for me to become mindful, to figure out what this practice is. So I Googled it. I Googled mindfulness and trauma. And that moment, that choice led to, by that group of people trying to find that new path to healing. This was a moment where my connection, where my renewal of faith truly started to kindle. My Google search led me to Buddhist psychologist, therapist, and meditation teacher Tara Brach, the reading that we got to earlier, and her book, Radical Acceptance. Tara Brach actually does weekly talks at the UU Church in, I think it's Bethesda, Maryland, every week. So reading that book and reading those teachings about the pause that I shared with you earlier, I found a new spiritual practice. And it was the first one that I'd ever discovered on my own, that practice of the pause. Pausing is about everything melting away for just a moment, right? To orient yourself to what you're feeling, what you may be resisting, and to remember in that moment that underneath everything, your awareness hasn't changed, that you're okay. So what that means for me is that when I find myself in struggle, anger, overwhelm, or even on the edge of panic, I can try and stop and pause and ask myself the question, what is really happening here? What am I feeling? I'm given the chance to name what is happening. I feel scared. I feel vulnerable. I feel panicked. I feel hungry. Once I've named it, think that feeling, I can ask myself more questions about it. And I get underneath that initial reaction to learn more about why I may be reacting the way that I am. It's about arriving in the present, arriving in my own awareness, pausing and stopping to judge myself and whatever negative emotion I'm feeling or whatever reaction I'm having. I'll give you a quick example, fairly recent. 2 Sundays ago, I was preaching at the UU Church in Huntsville, Alabama, and I'd never been there before, 1. 2, I thought that I was going to be giving the sermon, which I was, but I found out maybe like 2 or 3 days before that I was also like leading the service, like top to bottom, like introducing hymns, leading the prayer, doing joys and concerns in a place I'd never been before. And I was like, yes, I can do that, but I was nervous, right? And right before the service started, Ashley came down with me and we were talking to some people before the service. And as we walked back up to the front of the church, Ashley says to me, slow down, you're talking really fast. And it flew all over me. I was like, what do you mean I'm talking really fast? I thought I was having a nice conversation. Did I seem nervous? I thought I was doing fine. Like, why are you calling this out to me? Are you trying? I mean, in my head I was angry. And it was funny because I stopped and I took a deep breath and she's kind of looking at me like, Lilith's trying to help. So I asked myself the question, what's actually happening here? What are you really reacting to? And the truth is, I felt very vulnerable that I was going to fail and that the people in that church, in that sanctuary, many of whom were back in church for one of the first times they'd been in church for a long time, weren't going to have a good experience, or they would have felt like they didn't get any value out of it. I wanted to do well for them. I wanted to connect with them. And I was reacting to that. I wasn't reacting to my wife's kind advice to take a deep breath. So this is that process, right? And then I was able to forgive myself for my reaction, one, able to thank her for what she was actually trying to do. And then I was able to let that reaction and those emotions go and step into what I was actually there to do. So the best thing about this practice for me, outside of the fact that it just works for me, is that every time I do it, it feels like a little miracle. Like every time I get caught up in a bunch of negative reactions or some loop of reactivity and somehow find the presence of mind to pause, this little miracle occurs. I feel my heart open. I feel compassion for myself every time, like every single time I take this action. And this is not hyperbole. Like it feels as enlightening and freeing as the very first time I did it. So this means that every time I get caught up in those negative moments, what I'm actually experiencing is the gift of getting the chance to pause and begin again. So taking it back to when I learned those practices, like eventually finding those frequent moments of compassion for myself, well, that led to a sense of love for self that I'd never experienced in my life. And what that recognition became for me next was a point of connection to myself, to others, to my own awareness, which right now in this moment in my theology is what I consider that power greater than myself. So I was making a connection to spirit and to faith. And this connection point grew into an understanding of an intrinsic belief in this connection, a belief in something bigger than myself that strung us all together. And so in turn, that led me to a search for community around that belief. Long story, a little bit shorter. This was the catalyst that led me to Unitarian Universalism, to a call to ministry, and to be here with you all today. So during my more recent pandemic-induced disconnection from faith, in the midst of isolation, it was up to me to find my own way back. So what I did at that time was to dig back into my own personal practices that had worked for me before and start trying them on again. I started shining my own flashlight down into that deep well to see what I could do, what I could use to climb back up, what tools I already had. And that practice of pausing in the stress of isolation and the stress of no one knows what's happening or what's going to happen today or tomorrow truly started to bring me peace. And I have felt thankful every single day to have this practice back in my life. So as I've made my way back into the office, back into church buildings, back into face-to-face community, my spiritual practices have been my saving grace, keeping me grounded in what I know is true. So I know that spiritual practices look different and feel different for all of us. I've described one of the most important ones I have to you, but we all have prayer and meditation, writing, gardening, cooking, conversation, making music, all of it. These points of connection serve so much good for all of us because they lead us to where we're going next. And as we work to define the places these practices have in our daily lives, as we incorporate them into our routines and our schedules, I believe we're truly setting ourselves up for moments of deep, direct experience. Because even if we can't feel it at the time, even if we're not paying attention, the fact that we are all inextricably connected to everyone else isn't a matter of belief or opinion. It's actually a provable fact. And our daily practices just keep us awake to this truth. They keep us thankful and aware and open to more and more love. I know that I will have moments, even periods of time in my life, where I once again feel that low point of disconnection, where faith won't be as active a role in my day-to-day life as I hope that it will, or that I feel like I know it must for me. And so my hope for myself and for all of us is that we won't forget those tiny actions and those powerful practices that can bring us back to truth and to that spirit of life and love that holds us all. And as we grow closer to leaving here today, I hope you can take the time to be thoughtful about what those practices, those connection points are for you. If you are in your own time of disconnection now, first of all, I send you my love and my understanding. And I also hope that remembering what has grounded you in faith before and simply trying it again may serve as some sort of catalyst for you. We all have the ability to ignite our own faith in these ways. And sometimes the only ones who will be able to relight that, we will be the only ones who have the ability to relight that fire for ourselves. So I pray that you find the tools that work best for you and that you keep them tucked close by, right where you need them. May we all know what keeps us grounded. May we all know what opens our hearts. May we each carry those practices with us and live in the comfort of knowing that we always have a way back to faith. We always have a way back home. We always have a way back to love. May it be so.
Thank you very much. That was a great reminder to, brush off all those things that you put it back there, try them out again, find your way back to love. So our next hymn will be number 298, Wake Now My Senses. And I invite you to rise in body or spirit and sing along.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a
This is one of my absolute favorite hymns. I just love that one. And Fran, it was fun singing with you again. We've come to the time for Joys and Concerns. For those of you joining us on YouTube, thank you. We'll see you next week.